The disease begins with purple striations at the toes. If you have the disease, you'll be gruesomely dead in 72 hours, unless what? How can you prevent a nasty death? And your response was, there's a cave atop a 12,000-foot mountain where volcanic waters make a special ecosystem possible. A rare species of plant has a symbiotic relationship with a bacterium in said cave containing the cure. It requires a flight to Costa Rica and a spelunking into a dark tunnel.
My guest on today's episode is Tony Torzillo, and I have to say this one merged so much of my history with my present. We had an opportunity to talk a lot about my own personal biography, which I try to keep at a minimum, but this episode I just really went off the hook and told a lot of personal stories. Tony is a wealth of information, and I think you're going to love this episode. One thing to note, we jump into the actual storytelling portion right around 30 minutes. So if you think, what happened? Jody now has a medical podcast. Just bear with me, and also take some time to listen in, because there's some fascinating information here to digest, dissect, and to incorporate into your own fiction writing, possibly. It's also noticeable that this is my second biological sci-fi guest that I've had on in a couple of weeks. The last one was Shane Simonson, or Haldane B. Doyle. So check out both of those guys. If you enjoyed this kind of story, you're guaranteed to like their writing. And finally, last but not least, I have a couple of books out. If you want to purchase them, you always can. The cheapest place to go is directly to my website, www.jodyjsperling.com, or you can buy them off Amazon if you feel like that's more official and easier to do for some reason. You'd be wrong, but I totally am cool with that. And if you're interested, I am offering the first 3 ebooks in my Luke and Time Mysteries series for only $9.99. You got to reach directly out to me to get that link. I don't put it anywhere else on the internet except in my Facebook ads. So unless Facebook thinks that you're a perfect target for it, it's not going to necessarily grab onto you. I'm also only spending a small amount of money, so not a lot of people are seeing the ad at this point. But if you think you'd love to read all 3 books, the first 3 in the series for just $9.99, check with me in an email, comment on my Substack, whatever you want to do, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Tony Torzillo. If you've ever watched an author read in public and felt bored, TRBM is the antidote. TRBM is for writers what time-lapse was for painters, guitar solos and spotlights were for bands, what chainsaws and ice blocks were for sculptors. What does TRBM stand for? Tearful reunions brighten motherhood? Tasty rigatoni bolognese meal? Tempting revolutionary bears to mate? You decide.
I read a book about aging and how we're getting closer to being able to make it so that people don't age. So the book at the time was called Immortality: How Science is Expanding Your Lifespan. And it was written by Ben Bova, who's traditionally a science fiction writer, but it was a nonfiction book. So I read that book, and then I read another book about viruses. And one of the things that was interesting is that viruses, as they evolve, if you will, or as they're subjected to various environmental pressures, they tend to become more benign over time. Because you can imagine that if a virus kills off all of its hosts,
it has nowhere else to live. Yeah.
So the environmental pressure is death of hosts, and the other environmental pressure is people taking precautions because of that virus. And then, nowadays vaccines, right? So with those various environmental pressures, the virus has to adapt and change itself. So anyway, these 2 ideas came together in my head. Well, what if there were a virus that kept someone alive for a long period of time, and what would that look like, right? So
the virus comes in and actually increases the lifespan for its own benefit is the idea.
Right. So more of a symbiotic relationship. And so I started researching that, and it turns out there's different kinds of viruses. So there's one called a retrovirus that can
Mhm.
insert its RNA or DNA into a cell, and then that cell can replicate
Yeah.
and it doesn't harm the cell. There's
Mhm.
other kinds where when they inject their RNA or DNA into the cell, that cell replicates it, but then when it emerges, it destroys the cell. And
Yeah.
those are the kinds that we generally think of. Um, and then there's
What
a
is
whole
what's
other
an
class.
example? Sorry, what's an example of each? Can you think of one that maybe like the public would know? Where's one that doesn't harm the cell, and where's one that does harm the cell?
Yeah, so I guess the best example is one that we all have, and that's our mitochondria.
Okay.
So they think that the actual mitochondria in cells is a result of a retrovirus
Really?
transcribing its own RNA and DNA. Yeah, so I mean, it's not proven, but
That's
it's
interesting.
theorized.
Tell me,
Yeah.
tell me where I can find that. I can even edit it out of the podcast. I am personally interested in pursuing that. I've never heard that before, and that's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, I'd have to find some resources, but
No worries.
if you Google mitochondria origins,
Okay.
and there's a couple of different ideas. Some are saying, well, maybe it was proteobacteria, and some of it was from retroviruses. So
Yeah.
there's the jury's still out.
Okay.
Okay, so,
That's
and
cool though.
and
I mean, it's a cool idea because without mitochondria, you have no energy because mitochondria is what creates energy and ATP, and you can't live without ATP. And so, like the idea that our very life depends on a virus that is symbiotically inside of us would change the way I think all of us think about our life. I already know, and I think it's well known by many people that bacteria is highly responsible for our emotional well-being, and that there are more connections to our emotional well-being in our gut than there are in our brain. So we already know we have these symbiotic relationships with tiny little bacteria. And now I'm thinking, wow, virus is also at play. And critical for our livelihood, and that fascinates me.
yeah, no, so that's a really great point. So the bacteria in your gut, as you've said, can significantly influence your mood.
Yeah.
And they think that the way that the bacteria gets passed on from mother to child is in the birth canal, and so a
Right.
large portion of your mood and how you behave is dictated by these viruses, and so the average human body has a few billion
Right.
bacteria in it, but what maybe a lot, and that we call that the biome, right? Um, but what maybe a lot of people aren't aware of is that there's also something called a virome. The average human
Yeah.
body has over 1 trillion viruses in it.
See, now that is something that I was unaware of until we started talking, is that I knew about the biome. Um, why is this not more common knowledge that viruses are the same thing? It makes perfect sense, by the way. I mean,
Well, and so
for
it's a different,
example,
but these are not. So I haven't had a chance to talk about this other kind of virus, which is a bacteriophage. And
right.
so a bacteriophage is a virus that it looks like something with 6 little legs and a pin, and it looks like a walking syringe. It's crazy looking, okay, but it's evolved to attack a specific kind of bacteria, inject its DNA into it, and destroy it. And they're also called phages for short. And so the majority of those trillion viruses that I described that are in a person's body tend to be phages. Some phages are good, some phages are bad. So an example is if you have gut bacteria that are good and there are phages attacking those bacteria, well, then those are the bad ones. But you may also have viruses attacking bad bacteria in your body, and we would consider those good. But if you take any colony of bacteria, it's naturally going to have bacteriophages in it. And so some of the experiments that the Russians did back in the 50s and 60s was they would use a centrifuge to spin out those bacteriophages, and then they would inject people who were suffering from pneumonia or some other ailment with the bacteriophage, and it would kill it. Now, why didn't we do that
Kill
in
the
the US?
pneumonia.
Yeah, so why didn't we do that in the US? Well, it's because one, it's expensive. Two, you have to know the specific bacteria that's there. So you can't just say it's strep throat. You have to say it's this particular strain of streptococcus.
Right.
So the bacteriophage would have to be specific to that, and it's difficult to produce, right? So it's just not economically feasible for us to do it. But now with things like MRSA, it's becoming more of an idea. But anyway, so I conceived of this idea of a virus that would be beneficial and would extend the life of its host. And then, the idea was, well, how would that happen, and why don't we all have it, right? And so that's the origin story. My book, Children of the You, that I wrote and finally published and finished in 2022, was based on that concept. So that idea is what started me writing. Is I started writing it. I wrote maybe 46 pages. Life happened, and I paused until maybe 2017, right? And then I started writing again.
I love
long
that
answer
phrase.
Your question.
No,
Sorry.
it's great, and I'm really happy that we went there. So first off, the phrase "life happens" has got to be one of the most enjoyable phrases. George Carlin famously has a comedy sketch in which he talks about all the different uses of the F word. Which, by the way, you can swear on my podcast if you wish. I don't typically. It's just I'm not sure why, but this is the same thing. Life happens is one of those phrases that can go any different way. And I really like your use of it here. It's sort of like, hey, life happens. I didn't write for a little while, came back to it, did my thing. I love the idea. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm a passionate learner. I know one other person who feels the way I do, that if there was a model for just being in school, I would get every major there was. I'd go through math, I'd go through science, I'd go through English. I'd tear through every major I could and just continue to get degrees and learn things, because I have a real, I just light up when I'm learning something. So listening to you talk about this was like, I have to figure out all of this now. I have to understand and incorporate it into my understanding. Really excited about that. Had a guest on the show recently, pen name Haldane, who talked about biological sci-fi, and kind of a different take on sci-fi than most of us are familiar with. I'm excited to see where this goes, because I feel like it's sort of the same thing. You have a different take on what can only be called science fiction, right? It has to be science fiction because of the topic, yeah?
Right, yeah, and I would call it near future biological science fiction.
Yeah.
With some genetic engineering and quantum computing thrown in.
So it's just by sheer luck that I've had two people who are doing biological science fiction in such a short period of time. His episode will come out here shortly. Yours won't be far behind. What a cool difference. I think, if I'm going to be honest, I'm more drawn to a biological sci-fi than I am to a space exploration sci-fi, which is not to say that I don't want space thrown in, but I really like the element of exploring what we already know, because it's kind of like our bodies are a universe unto themselves. There's so much happening that I feel like we can plumb for great effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, I'm really into space exploration. I've read a lot of books about them. I've chosen not to write those types of books.
Yeah.
And part of it is because I feel like in order for us to actively explore space, there need to be some changes in our biology. We need to have a better understanding of our own biology. For one, just our lifespan being as short as it is makes it hard to do any sort of deep space exploration beyond our solar system.
Yeah.
Not that there's not plenty of we could do within our own solar system. There's plenty to be discovered there. But and then the other piece is when you're in space without a significant amount of shielding, which takes mass, which is hard to get out of the Earth's gravity, you're subject to a lot of cellular degeneration, and we don't really know how to counteract that. And so, without some advances in biology and some basic understanding of our own human bodies, which, if you were to take a 19th or 20th century physician and put them in a doctor's office today, the methodologies that they utilized wouldn't be much different. It's really about, what are your symptoms?
Right.
Okay, well, let's take this class of symptoms and let's, we have advanced methods available where we can do genome sequencing of the viruses and bacteria in your body and figure out exactly what they are. But we don't take advantage of those due to economic reasons, right?
Okay, so what we're going to do, it's a little unconventional for the way that I typically run story episodes, but we're going to continue to talk about this. I'm going to read the tweets because the tweets themselves that you're on my show to talk about and tell a story about are intimately tied in here. But I want to, as I'm doing this part, I'm going to read both of our tweets, and I just want to put this in your brain to kind of chew on and come back to.
Okay.
I had some extreme anxiety to the point where it was disruptive in my life. And I tried everything I could to get rid of it. Over and over and over again, I would go into an employment situation. I would work for a while. As soon as I figured out how to do the job, I became bored. And when I became bored, all I could think about was quitting and leaving. I learned everything I need to learn at this job. I've got to go. I can't stand going into work. And the anxiety and the terror and the dread would paralyze me. This happened a lot, and I was married, and so I'm going into a time where I have children. I need stability. I can't figure it out. I have this great job that's paying me really good money, especially for my age. And I've gotten to that point where I'm like, I have to leave this place. There's nothing left for me here, and I'm in dread. I have a friend who was a diagnosed schizophrenic. He went to every option he could. He got medicines for schizophrenia. He went and I'm going to start using the word, so I'll tip you off to where this is going, but he went to every allopathic doctor he could find, and nobody could cure him. And he was just at his wit's end. So he went to a homeopathic physician, and the homeopath gave him a remedy, and he has never had a recurrence since they found his remedy of schizophrenic symptoms. All that to say, this friend introduced me to the homeopath. I went to the homeopath kind of as a last resort, as well as I can't stay at this job. It's destroying my life mentally. And I found relief. There's more to it, but I'm putting all of that on the table because you just mentioned that the medical world is still kind of doing the same thing it was for a long time. Homeopathy was actually a really big part of the medical world for a while, and it's only been in the last maybe 100 years that it got moved out. I'm going to reserve all of my other comments until we kind of dive back into it. But let's read these tweets, collect your thoughts, and we'll kind of jump back in. So the tweet that I invited you on the show for, actually I've invited you twice. You took me up on the second one. The disease begins with purple striations at the toes. If you have the disease, you'll be gruesomely dead in 72 hours unless what? How can you prevent a nasty death? And your response was, there's a cave atop a 12,000-foot mountain where volcanic waters make a special ecosystem possible. A rare species of plant has a symbiotic relationship with a bacterium in said cave containing the cure. It requires a flight to Costa Rica and a spelunking into a dark tunnel. So I absolutely want to tell this story because if you haven't already written the book and I just happened to stumble into it, the story itself is really good. But now that people have kind of an orientation to why we've been talking about medical things, let's jump back into the homeopathy. Share your thoughts with, I feel like you're the kind of person who has the education, that you're aware of homeopathy and has thoughts.
Yeah. So I think we need to make a distinction between homeopathy and naturopathy. And
yes,
so the idea of homeopathy, if you take the Greek roots, right? So homeo means the same. Yep. And pathy essentially means what's bothering you. So homeopathy means the same as what's bothering you.
Yep.
And so the idea of homeopathy is that if you're suffering from some sort of malady, like a headache, for example, they give you something that would cause similar symptoms, and that would somehow resolve the issue. My personal opinion on homeopathy is that I don't feel like it was grounded in solid science. Naturopathy, on the other hand, is where we are taking things from nature, plants, herbs, etc., and practice for thousands of years in China and ancient Ireland and throughout the world, right? Where we saw, okay, if I take this plant and I have this malady, it goes away, right? And so it's naturopathy is based on that. And so I'm more of a believer in the idea of naturopathy over homeopathy. In some cases, maybe it's the placebo effect that might be working. And in other cases, possibly for whatever helped you deal with your situation. I don't know the reasons why a lot of our body chemistry is different. For you, it worked. So, great. But as a general rule, I don't tend to, if I see a homeopathic remedy in the store, I won't buy it. If I see a naturopathic remedy, then I'm more inclined to buy that.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, and I really appreciate the level of respect you approach the question with, not knowing kind of my path through everything. It just shows I think it shows a lot of care and consideration on your part for humans that you answered the question the way that you did. Really soft, still expressing your doubt that homeopathy works. Here's where I land on it is I think that there are still scientific frontiers that we just don't have a way of reckoning with. So I think that there's a possibility that we don't understand the science behind homeopathic remedies. For anybody who's listening and doesn't know what the hell it is, homeopathic remedies are derived by taking that like substance and putting a droplet of it. And this is really boiled down, but putting a droplet of it in water and shaking it really, really hard. And then taking a droplet of that, we'll say it's like a gallon of solution. You take one drop, put it in another gallon of water, shake that, and reiterate that maybe as many as 100 times. For one, I'd love to see the labs that actually produce that, because that's so labor intensive that to come up with a homeopathic remedy seems interestingly economically impossible. However,
and so that may be part of the issue too, right? Is that there's no real oversight in it. And one thing I will say, as you were talking, I thought of this. So I have pretty bad allergies to pollen. Grass is my worst, right? And so I went through a series of allergy shots for about 3 years. And what they did is they would inject me with the pollens that I was allergic to. And they would increasingly get more potent as time went on. So, when I first was getting it, it was very weak injection. And so it sort of teaches your immune system to no longer react to that.
Okay.
I'm oversimplifying it probably, but, but it is, it's giving you, if we were to use the term homeopathy, any allergist listening here would probably balk at my statement, but, maybe that is a sort of similar to homeopathy in that you're taking what's ailing the person and you're using that to cure it.
Small enough level
I mean, there's could certainly be cases of homeopathy where it works. I just, the things I see for sale in the store, I tend to shy away from.
Yeah. Add to it, there are other cases. So the like cures like is an area of huge contention from allopathic medicine to homeopathic medicine. And to that, you would ask, okay, so we have this outbreak of ADHD, and what the doctors are saying, as far as I understand and have researched, is that this kid is overstimulated, so let's give him a stimulant, and that stimulant will counteract their overstimulation and bring them back to base level. So I think that there's some proof that like cures like has at least a place in our thought process. Here's where my story finishes, and then I want to jump into telling your story because I'm fascinated by your response to that tweet. I got this homeopathic remedy, and it really worked really well for years. And then my children were having some struggles. My oldest son is on the spectrum. We've never had him diagnosed. That's a personal choice because we don't want him to carry a label around, but we're deeply steeped in how to kind of work with him. And we've had a lot of success. My middle son, we can't figure out what's going on with him, but he has this high level of defiance, and it's kind of ruining his social life and his school and all of that kind of stuff. We saw the success I had with homeopathy, and so we went first to the homeopathic physician this time to try to get him remedies. And after 4 or 5, 6, nothing's working. It's kind of similar to how I was feeling about the allopathic stuff. And I think as I started to explore and research more and doubt what was going on, um, one of the main symptoms of my issue returned. And at that moment, I was like, I think I'm dealing with placebo here. I think I was so fully bought into homeopathy that the placebo effect really did the work. And placebo is an amazing thing. But as soon as I stopped,
so I have a funny story about that actually.
Yeah, please.
My daughter, who's now 13, when she was around 6 or 7, she would say, I'm sure you've experienced this with your kids. She would get out of bed and say, "Hey, I'm having trouble sleeping."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay." So I said, "Well, we're going to give you some placebo." And she said, "Well, what's placebo?" I said, "Well, placebo has been shown in experiments and studies to help people with their problems. Like it had no statistically significant difference from the medicine, and which is all true, right?"
Yes, exactly.
And I said, "So we're going to give you some placebo." So I just gave her a little bit of water with maybe a hint of sugar in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she would drink it, and she would say, "Okay, well, I feel tired now. The placebo's working," and she would go to sleep. No problem. And she would ask for placebo maybe once or twice a week, and it worked. But it was an actual placebo. It wasn't, wasn't something else. But it is powerful. Our minds are very powerful at helping us heal. Even just having a positive attitude, when you're fighting cancer or anything like that, can go a long way.
So there's a couple of statements. For one, I have exactly the same thing. It was fairly recent. My youngest son had gotten some kind of, it probably was impetigo from wrestling mats, but he's had a really bad itch. And so he had scratched it and broken open a blister. And then he needed a Band-Aid. And I was like, dude, this is getting old. So I said, buddy, I've got a special thing for you that'll work. And I said, it's placebo. Literally, this is actually true. I said, it's placebo. It's going to work really well for you. And he's like, what's that? And I said, well, it hurts a teeny bit, but once I get it inside your ear, it will get rid of the itch and you'll feel better. So I just recently heard somebody talking about part of placebo is making sure that they understand they're not just drinking water. Like you put that little bit of sugar in there so that your daughter's mind says this tastes different. There must be something special in here. So just enough to give him that kind of like, ooh, ouch. I just pinched his earlobe just enough that he felt like I must have like injected something in there. And all better. No more itching. He doesn't need a Band-Aid. He just feels better and empowered and everything. Placebo is cool. So my second thing on placebo, though, is what you said about cancer. If humanity could ever learn how to harness placebo, we could cure anything. It feels that way to me. It feels as if placebo, like our body actually holds the answer. And it's kind of sad that we can't figure out how to use it with the scientific method, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think being able to tap into that power and just, one of the things they found with studies of people that have been through really horrific tragedies, and some of them came out of it completely messed up for the rest of their life, and some of them came out of it feeling pretty horrible, but then afterwards they recovered. And the main thing they found that was different between the two people was that the people that were okay in the long term had told themselves, "I'm going to be okay."
Yeah.
And that alone was enough to make them have a better sense of well-being, a better sense of mental health. And so, part of what you're doing when you're giving someone a placebo, even if you believe it's real and they believe it's real, right? Let's take your homeopathic example.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it was placebo, but let's say that it was, right?
Yeah.
So if it were, then you had this sense that now that I'm taking this thing, I'm going to be okay. Yeah. And it's really just about, believing that enough that somehow the rest of your body believes it and does what it needs to do to fix itself.
Exactly. That fascinates me. I 100% believe that as much as I believe anything else. Like, I believe that the power inside of our body is greater than the doctors we can visit, is greater than the homeopath that we can visit, or the naturopath that we can visit. There's something inside of our body that is able to channel and communicate in such a way that if belief exists, you can overcome anything. I wish I could remember the guy's name right now. He's fairly popular in the marketing and sales world, but he got hit by a car and was more or less left for dead and said he would never walk again. And now he runs marathons. But not only did that happen, after he got better and started running marathons, he was diagnosed with a type of cancer that was a 1% chance of survival. And he just said, I will survive this. And he's survived. And so obviously when you have a guy who's had 2 interactions with what should be death, and total change of life, and to recover, a lot of people listen. The issue is he doesn't understand that it's simply his character, his brain, that is the powerful thing. So he goes and writes these books. The Miracle Morning is the name of the book. You can look him up if you want to. I think he's a great guy and I love his message. I love his positivity. But at the same time, I'm sort of like, now you're selling this routine that you built after the fact, when the reality was it was just your own passion to have verve and life that healed you.
True. However, you read his story or you hear his tale and you think,
yes,
well, that worked.
Yes.
So by adopting the same methodologies, it will work for me. And so you've been sort of tricked into believing, this is, or convinced rather that, I'm going to be okay after I do this. And so,
that's true. And so it works really well for people. He's a powerful inspiration for a lot of people. Okay. Man, I wish we could go for a lot longer than we actually can. Let's try to tell the story.
Yeah. So the idea comes from an actual story from Costa Rica. So there's a volcano in Costa Rica called El Rincón de la Vieja, and Rincón means corner. And in English, you can say corner to mean a far and remote location. Most people don't use it that way nowadays, but you've probably heard the far corners of the earth, right? And that's that context that it means. And de la Vieja means of the old woman. So the story behind this volcano is that there were 2 indigenous tribes at war, and the chief, who was called the cacique in the tribe. The cacique is the person in charge of everything. His daughter was a healer, and what she would do is she would go to these volcanic waters, and she would find plants, and she knew which plants would cure people of various ailments. And so whenever anyone was sick, they would go to her and they would get healed. Well, she happened to fall in love with a man from the warring tribe. When her father found out about it, the cacique, he took the man and he threw him into the volcano. And she was, of course, distraught because she was pregnant with his child.
Distraught.
And distraught's putting it mildly, right? So when she had the child, she went to the top of the volcano and she threw her child into the volcano so that it could be with its father. So
wow,
she spent the rest of her days living in this remote volcano. She didn't jump in herself, but whenever anyone was sick, they would seek her out. And when people would ask, well, hey, where's La Vieja? Where's the old woman? They would say, oh, she's in El Rincón, that faraway place with the volcano. And so the volcano became named El Rincón de la Vieja.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
I'd just gotten back from Costa Rica and heard this story when I saw your tweet. And that's what inspired me to think that there was this plant that would be capable of curing the with a symbiotic relationship with the bacteria, because this happens a lot with fungus, where a fungus and a plant will have a relationship, or
yes,
there's something called a lichen, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yeah,
it breaks rocks down into soil. Well, it's a fungus and it's a bacteria.
yeah.
And I think there's another organism. There's three organisms that
There
have
are
this
three. Okay, I
symbiotic
knew there was a
relationship.
fungus and a bacteria. Okay,
Yeah. So they
it's like an
work
algae,
together.
right? So it's an algae.
Algae.
Fungus
There's an
and a
algae,
bacteria.
a bacteria, and a fungus, and the three of them have this symbiotic relationship, and they live on rocks, and they turn them into dirt, and we wouldn't be here without them, right? So, there's lots of examples of this sort of symbiosis in nature. So, I thought that would be what would cure these purple striations, which are caused by another bacteria, but this this bacteria would be able to defeat it.
Yeah. What an amazing, I just need time to think, to tell you the truth. We're going to get off this podcast, and I'm just going to have to sit down and think for a while, because you've introduced this whole new idea to me that I knew was true. I don't even have an analogy for it at the moment, to be honest. The podcast itself began the title of my podcast was Create, Collaborate. I'm not going to go into the stupid story about how poorly I spelled it to be clever or anything like that. But my deepest belief about all good things is that they are collaborative. And I mean, gosh, I could just rip off shorthand so many of them. I am not the man I am without my wife. And I'm not saying I'm a good man, but I'm certainly not a functional man without her. And that search for her created who I am. And being able to lean into her created the stability so that I can do things that I couldn't have done otherwise. I'm not the person I am. I'm not the storyteller I am without my friend JP, and his ability to kind of help me approach really scary topics that made me frightened. And on and on and on and on I could go, iterating all of the collaborations that lead to this place that I'm very happy to be in, and that I think will bring success into my life and have an impact on the world at some level, hopefully a really big level. And I assume the same is true of you, because you're so laser focused on this symbiotic relationship that there's no chance that you don't spend a lot of days just thinking about how fortunate partnerships create massive impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the way we think, you'd like to think that your consciousness and everything that you think you're in complete control of. But it's really a set of systems that are talking to each other in your brain, and it's billions of neurons, and the stuff that we become aware of in our conscious minds is a very small part. It's a tip of that whole iceberg that's underneath, right? And so that's a partnership between all of our cells, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with what you're saying. So with this story, did we want to keep?
Yeah,
I had some ideas about what was going to happen next.
Yes,
but
I do. I want you to keep telling the story. Absolutely, I want you to keep telling the story.
Okay, so the flight to Costa Rica takes them 6 hours, and the striations continue. He's hiding the zombie bite, right? So he has to get on the plane and make it through security. And taking off his shoes is very stressful, because even getting them on was super painful. So when he goes to take off his shoes and puts them in the cart, he's kind of wincing, and he gets a few looks from the Department of Homeland Security, but they let him through, right? And so while he's on the flight, he gets increasingly concerned glances from the airline personnel, right? Who are wondering why is this guy continue rubbing his feet, and what's going on, but he's not showing the striations, right? But his friend has convinced him that the cure exists, and that they can find it at the top of this volcano. So to make a long story short, after arriving in Costa Rica and traveling to the base of this volcano, there's no infrastructure in place to get to the top. And so they actually have to hike.
Yeah.
And this in itself is challenging because, with the disease, it's very difficult to step. So each step is more painful than the last. And they finally arrive to the top of the volcano. And he's in decent shape, but fairly winded because of the disease. And by the time he arrives, they get to this cave with some flashlights. It's cold up there. I mean, it was 80 degrees on the bottom. By the time they get to the top, they're at about 5 degrees Fahrenheit, right?
Yeah.
So it's cold.
One thing I love right here is you almost certainly have kind of a time horizon. And it's great for storytelling as well as true of just biology, is there's a point of no return where you've degraded far enough that even the cure will no longer work. And so we're fighting against the clock, not just the clock that I said, within 72 hours, you die a gruesome death, but there's a time horizon within the 72 hours where if you don't get there, it's too late. I think that's a part of this as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So when he gets to the cave, they go inside. It's dark, it's smelly. There's a bat comes flying out, and he has to dodge. And then it gets increasingly more cramped. There's a dripping noise and this damp, earthy smell as they continue to work their way into the cave. And he's always struggled with claustrophobia, but he knows this is his only hope, and he feels everything kind of closing in around, and the headlamp is faced forward, and all he sees are just more rocks and dirt. But then he starts to smell sort of this minty smell, right? And they come upon this. They finally, the cavern opens up, and they come upon this ice cold pool. And he looks over at his friend and says, "Okay, Angela, where's the cure?" And she has a concerned look on her face. She's rummaging through the plants, and she says, "It's not here. The plant's gone." And so at that moment, he loses hope, and the pain in his feet that he's been ignoring all this time becomes excruciating. And he looks and sees that the purple lines have made their way up past his knee. And he knows that once it gets to the top of his thigh, he's done. So
I love that. I love the physical representation of time and that, like, you can actually visibly see time happening in this case.
And so he says, "Is there any other place where we could get this plant?" And she says, "No, this is the only place that I know of." And so they start looking around, and they start seeing shovel marks. And so they realize that someone else has been there before and has taken the plants. So they leave without the cure, but with the knowledge that someone else must have it.
Yeah.
So they go to the base, and they talk to some of the people that are locals there, and they ask if they've seen anybody. And they say, yes, there was a gringo that came here just yesterday. And,
it's always a gringo, isn't it?
and he took all of the plants, and he's planning to grow them in his laboratory and make lots of money. And so they pay them some money, and they take them to the place where this gringo is. Of course, there's a concertina wire around the building, and he looks down and sees that the line has crept a few inches more above his knee. And at this point, he's quite desperate. So they wait until nightfall because they see that there are guards roaming around the outside. And they finally get their chance to sneak into the building. So when they get into the building, they're one of the men comes at them and is telling them, "What are you doing here?" Is pointing the gun, and Angela's holding her hands up. He grabs the gun, swipes it out of the way, throws it to the ground, and they fight their way into the building, where they find one of the plants still alive, and she says, "But we can't do this. This is the last of this species.
Yeah.
You can't eat this. If you eat it, then the species is gone."
Mm.
And he says, "Well, what about me? I'm going to die.
I'm the last of me.
if I don't eat this, right?"
Yeah.
So they look around the lab and find that most of the other plants have died, and so they can't live outside of this environment that they were in.
Mm-hmm.
So he decides, let's bring them back, and he goes back through this arduous journey of reclimbing the mountain, and by that time it's 3/4 of the way up. And when they put these other plants that appeared to be dead around the pool, they start to sort of have this effervescent color that comes to them. And he's asking, "Well, what is that effervescence that they, and apparently it's this photoluminescent bacteria that actually provides the luminescence to the plant that allows it to do photosynthesis in this dark area." Right. And that combined with the bacteria is what allows, so he's able to take this plant that's still fresh and eat it. And, initially all it does is make him puke. But after they decide that they're going to stay the night in the cave because they're quite tired, and they drink some of this cool, refreshing water, and he falls asleep. And when he wakes up, Angela's looking at him and says, "How are you feeling?" And he says, "Wow, it's amazing. I've never slept that well before." And he looks down, and the purple striations are gone.
Yeah.
So they discover, as they continue to look into this, that this plant can actually be grown in another environment. They just need to keep it dark, and so they're able to use that to synthesize a drug and cure other people of the disease and stem off what could have killed millions of people.
I love it. I love how much is still open to the story. I mean, exactly like we discussed, you give a beautiful, really compelling outline. I think like almost in a campfire stories kind of way. And I apologize, you can hear my kids now. They've gotten home. Such a refreshing, such a rewarding, such a compelling story. It's really, really good. I will tell you that I've interrupted nobody less than I interrupted you. You just really had command of the story and the idea, and I was along for the ride. So I don't know if you prepared ahead of time.
No,
you said you didn't. Yeah, you just start to have these ideas. That's really, really impressive. And there's just some deep themes as well as human emotion involved in that story that I really, really enjoy. I like that. It felt theatrical to me. I'll be honest. I felt like a little bit like I was watching a movie. There was a point there where I'm just seeing and kind of visualizing all the things and starting to add some of my own details and a few little conflicts here and there, and why the people dig up the plants and what they're hoping to achieve, and wonderfully told. I wish I didn't have to end this episode. I want to just keep talking and telling the story and getting to know you more, because I think that you are a wealth of information. But because I do have to end, all good things must come to an end. Tell the listeners where they can find you, where they can find any published work you have, or anything at all that you want to direct people toward to get to know you better.
Yeah, so if you go to Amazon and search for Children of the U. That's my first book that I've published, and I do have another book planned this year. I do have an audiobook coming out. So if you search for Tony Torzillo on Amazon, you should be able to find me. I also have a website that I don't put much attention into. It's tonytorzillo.com. You may find updates there, but I haven't touched it for a while. So
Yeah, I hear you.
And you can also find me on Twitter, Tony Torzillo on Twitter.
Perfect. Alrighty. Well, thank you for telling the story today. It was really, really well done. I had a lot of fun. I feel like lately I've had some good luck, and so I've had some good guests, but every time I'm like, this is the best story I've heard. I can't believe I just got to witness this story. So, and that's how I feel this time. And I really appreciate you accepting my invite. It was very rewarding.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to TRBM. The theme music was provided by the ever-talented Christopher Talon. And hey, if you liked what you heard, share this show with other readers, because what's the point of telling stories if nobody's listening?